They put handcuffs on me in front of 47 people. I counted them later, not because I was calm, but because counting was the only way I knew to keep from saying something that would make everything worse. A white officer with a jaw like a cinder block pressed my wrists together behind my back, while an elderly woman I had just saved from dying on the sidewalk screamed at him from a stretcher. "That's the man who saved me. That's the man who saved me." He didn't look at her. He looked at me. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't anger. It was certainty. The kind that doesn't need evidence. The kind that arrives fully formed and sees no reason to question itself. I want to tell you how a Tuesday morning in October became the most important day of my life. Not because of what that officer did to me, because of what I did next. I had been chief of cardiovascular surgery at City General for 6 years, 6 years of 70-hour weeks, of learning the exact weight of a human heart in my palm, about 300 grams, roughly the size of a large fist, and of understanding that the difference between a person living and dying often came down to a single decision made in a single second. My name was Marcus Webb. I was 41 years old. I had performed over 2,000 open-heart surgeries, published 31 papers in peer-reviewed journals, and trained 17 surgeons who are now practicing in hospitals across the country. My residents called me Dr. Webb to my face and the machine behind my back, which I took as a compliment. Machines don't panic. Machines don't hesitate. Machines don't feel the floor tilt beneath them when a monitor flatlines. My mornings had a particular rhythm I had refined over years, the way a musician refines a scale. I woke at 5:15 without an alarm. I made coffee, dark roast, no sugar, in a French press my ex-wife Eleanor had left behind, along with a note that said, "For the man who loves routines more than people." She wasn't entirely wrong. I drank the coffee standing at the kitchen window of my apartment on the 14th floor, watching the city blink awake below me. The river caught the early light in a way that always struck me as unnecessarily beautiful for a place this tired. Then I ran. 5 miles, same route, same pace. Shower, breakfast, 2 eggs, whole wheat toast, an orange, a glass of water. And then I drove to the hospital. The car was a 6-year-old Volvo, charcoal gray, nothing remarkable. I had been offered nicer cars. There were certain financial advantages to being the highest-paid surgeon on staff. But I didn't see the point. A car gets you from one place to another. I wasn't trying to announce myself. I had spent too many years watching strangers look at me and seeing the exact moment they recalibrated their expectations. A tall black man in an expensive car reads differently than a tall black man in an ordinary one. I had learned long ago that other people's arithmetic was not my problem. Most days I believed this. The morning of October 14th was no different from any other, until it was. I had a surgery scheduled at 8, a valve replacement on a 63-year-old retired teacher named Howard Briggs, who had been waiting 3 months for this day. I left my apartment at 6:40, earlier than usual, because I had promised myself I would stop at the bakery 2 blocks from the hospital and bring the OR team something warm. It was a small gesture, but I had learned that small gestures compound into something that matters. I was on Meridian Avenue, half a block from the bakery, when I saw her. She was perhaps 75 years old, white-haired and small-framed, wearing a tan coat and orthopedic shoes, a canvas grocery bag in one hand and a phone in the other. And then she simply stopped. Not the way people stop to check a message. She stopped the way a light goes out. Her knees buckled first, then her body folded sideways, and the groceries hit the pavement a full second before she did. A carton of eggs, a head of broccoli, a box of crackers that slid halfway under a parked car. I was running before I consciously decided to run. There were other people on the street. A young woman with earbuds who gasped and pressed herself against a storefront wall. A man in a delivery uniform who took out his phone to call for help I assumed, though the camera was facing toward me, not toward his ear. A teenager who stood perfectly still, as if observing something he couldn't quite classify. None of them moved toward her. I dropped to my knees on the cold concrete. Her color was wrong, a grayish blue around the lips that I recognized the way you recognize a smell from childhood, immediately and without needing to think. I pressed 2 fingers to her carotid. The pulse was there but thready, fluttering like a moth trapped behind glass. Her breathing was shallow and irregular. Her eyes were half open and unfocused, the gaze of someone very far away. "Ma'am," I said, clearly and close to her ear, "my name is Marcus Webb. I'm a surgeon. You're going to be okay. Can you hear me?" Her fingers twitched against the concrete. That was enough. I turned to the small crowd that had gathered. 6 people, maybe 7, frozen in that particular urban paralysis where everyone assumes someone else has already called. "Someone call 911 right now," I said. Not a request. The voice I used when a resident froze in the OR. "Tell them suspected cardiac event. Female, approximately 75, Meridian Avenue between 5th and 6th. Go." The woman with the earbuds finally moved. Her hands were shaking as she dialed. I loosened the top button of the woman's coat. Checked her airway. Her breathing steadied slightly. Not good, not safe, but not immediately catastrophic. I kept 2 fingers on her wrist and counted. 12 years of training and 6 years of practice had compressed into something that felt less like thought and more like listening. The body tells you what it needs, if you know how to hear it. What I did not hear, what I was too focused to notice until it was too late, was the squad car pulling to the curb behind me. "Hey, hey, step away from her." The voice was loud and calibrated, the kind engineered to stop motion. I looked up. 2 officers. The one who had spoken was broad-shouldered, mid-30s, with a tight jaw and the slightly too controlled posture of a man who had already decided something before he arrived. His hand was not on his weapon, but it was close. I did not step away. Her pulse had just skipped in a way I didn't like. "I'm a physician," I said, keeping my voice level. "This woman is in cardiac distress. I'm monitoring her pulse until the ambulance arrives. My name is Dr. Marcus Webb, Chief of Cardiovascular Surgery at City General." 2 seconds of silence passed between us. I had spent enough of my life in rooms with men like this to understand exactly what was happening inside those 2 seconds. He was looking at me. He was looking at me kneeling on a sidewalk over an unconscious white woman. He was running his arithmetic. I said, "Step away," he repeated, moving closer. "Officer," I said, measuring every word the way I measured a dosage. "This woman needs continuous monitoring. The moment I release her wrist, I lose real-time data on her cardiac rhythm. The ambulance is approximately 4 minutes out. Please allow me to." "Get up." The second officer had circled around behind me. I heard the creak of leather, the particular sound of equipment shifting on a belt. My hands did not shake. I want you to understand that. I have stood in operating rooms where a patient was dying on my table, and my hands have never shaken. But in the 3 seconds it took me to release the woman's wrist, stand, and straighten to my full height, something cold moved through the center of my chest that had nothing to do with the October air. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "What is the charge?" I asked. "Turn around." The woman on the ground made a small sound, confused, surfacing from somewhere deep. "That's the man who saved me," she said. Thin voice, but clear. "He helped me. Why are you—" "Ma'am, please stay still," the first officer said, not looking at her. He was looking at me. And I turned around. I put my hands behind my back. The handcuffs closed around my wrists with a sound like a lock engaging, and I remember thinking, with the strange clarity that arrives in the worst moments, that I would hear that sound for the rest of my life. The ambulance arrived 90 seconds later. I watched the paramedics work from behind a patrol car window, my wrists pinned, my surgical hands pressed against vinyl that smelled of disinfectant and old coffee. The woman's name, I would learn later, was Dorothy Hamill, not the skater, she would tell me this herself, laughing softly in a hospital room 3 days later. She was 74. She had a partially blocked left anterior descending artery that, without intervention in the next several hours, would almost certainly have killed her. I sat in the back of that patrol car. I did not say another word, but I was already thinking. The precinct smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. I sat on a hard plastic chair bolted to the wall and waited while a desk sergeant with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose typed something into a computer with 2 fingers, very slowly, as if each key required a separate decision. The fluorescent light above me flickered every 40 seconds. I counted. Machines don't panic. Officer Carlin, I had read the nameplate on his chest when he pushed me into the car, was at the far end of the room filling out a report. He hadn't spoken to me since the sidewalk. His partner, a younger man named Doyle, who had looked vaguely uncomfortable during the entire arrest, was nowhere in sight. I had been charged with obstruction and resisting, 2 charges that required nothing more than a determined officer and a convenient moment of linguistic creativity. My phone had been placed in a plastic bag at the front desk. I had watched it buzz 4 times through the clear plastic before the sergeant set it aside without checking. At 7:43, it buzzed a 5th time, then a 6th. Then it began ringing continuously, one call overlapping into the next like a drum roll. "Someone's popular," the desk sergeant muttered. Not to me, just to the room. I said nothing, but I knew exactly who was calling. Howard Briggs was being prepped for surgery at this moment. His chest would be marked with a surgical pen. His wife would be in the waiting room holding a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. My resident, Dr. Yolanda Price, would be at the scrub sink trying to reach me, her voice controlled but her mind already running through scenarios she didn't want to consider. A valve replacement is not a procedure you hand to a second-year resident 10 minutes before incision. "I need to make a phone call," I said. The desk sergeant looked up over his glasses. "You'll get your call. My patient is scheduled for open-heart surgery in 17 minutes, I said, with the same tone I used when I needed a resident to understand something quickly and completely. If I am not in that operating room, he will either not have the surgery today, which creates significant cardiac risk, or he will have it without his attending surgeon. I need to make one call to my hospital. One. Right now." The sergeant stared at me for a long moment. Something shifted in his face. Not sympathy exactly. More like the particular discomfort of a man who has just realized a situation may be more complicated than it appeared. "I'll see what I can do," he said finally, and stood up. What he did was walk to Carlin's desk and speak to him in a low voice. I watched Carlin's jaw tighten. He shook his head twice. Then the sergeant said something else, and Carlin set down his pen with a small controlled violence that rattled the stapler beside it. 3 minutes later, my phone was placed on the counter in front of me, still in its bag. One call. I called Yolanda. She picked up on the first half ring. "Dr. Webb, where are you?" "Howard's prepped. We've been—" "Listen carefully," I said. "I'm at the 3rd District Precinct on Alderman Street. I've been detained. Call Dr. Amir Chakraborty and ask him to observe until I arrive. Do not begin the incision. Tell Howard I'm coming." A silence that lasted exactly 2 seconds. "Detained," she repeated. Not a question. A very particular kind of understanding was happening on her end of the line. "Call Amir. And Yolanda, call Richard Osei." Another pause. Richard Osei was the hospital's chief legal officer. We had been friends for 11 years. He had my emergency contact on a card he kept in his wallet. Already done, she said quietly. He called us first. I set the phone down. The delivery man's camera. Of course. The footage had already traveled faster than the paperwork. What happened in the next 40 minutes unfolded in layers, each one arriving before the previous one had fully settled. First came Richard, in a dark coat, and the specific expression of a man who has spent 20 years solving problems, and can identify exactly which kind he is looking at from across a room. He pushed through the precinct door at 8:14, a woman I didn't recognize behind him. Compact, brisk, carrying a leather portfolio that she clutched with both hands like a shield. That's my client," Richard said to the desk sergeant, not breaking stride. "Sir, visiting hours." "He's not a visitor. He's wrongfully detained." Richard set a business card on the counter without stopping. "That's my card. This is Denise Carmichael, civil rights attorney. We'd like to speak to whoever authorized this arrest." The woman with the portfolio, Carmichael, looked at me with the focused, assessing calm of someone who has seen this specific situation before and has a prepared position on it. "Dr. Webb, don't say anything else until we've spoken." The second layer arrived 6 minutes after Richard. Captain Frances Hollis, 3rd District Commander, a woman somewhere in her late 50s with iron-gray hair and the composed, slightly exhausted look of someone who had navigated 30 years of exactly this kind of morning. She came in from a back hallway still buttoning her jacket cuff, and the moment she saw Richard Osey and Denise Carmichael standing at her front desk, she stopped walking. "Brief me," she said to the room. What followed was not a confrontation. It was a reckoning, and those are quieter. Carlin was called in from the far room. He stood at the edge of the space with the folder from his report, explaining, in a tone that had started out confident and was becoming something else with each passing sentence, that he had responded to a call about a man behaving erratically near a collapsed woman, that the suspect had refused to step back from the victim, that he had failed to provide identification. "I provided my name, my title, and my institution," I said. Carmichael put a hand on my arm. I stopped. "He's right that he identified himself," a voice said from near the door. Everyone turned. It was Doyle, Carlin's partner, standing just inside the entrance with his jacket half unzipped, looking like a man who had been awake for too long and had decided that sleep wasn't worth what it cost tonight. He told us he was a doctor immediately, before you asked him to stand up." Doyle's eyes moved to Carlin for one brief second, and then away. He was monitoring her pulse. She was unconscious. There was no erratic behavior. He was the only one on that sidewalk who knew what he was doing. The precinct had gone very quiet. 3 officers at nearby desks had stopped typing. The desk sergeant's 2-fingered method had ground to a complete halt. Captain Hollis was looking at Carlin with an expression I recognized from a different context. The face of a person who has just found something in a lab result they were hoping not to find. Carlin's jaw was working, but whatever calibration he was running inside his head was returning no useful output. "The footage is already public," Richard said. Not loudly. He didn't need to say it loudly. 40 seconds of body cam, plus a full 90-second clip from a delivery driver. Dr. Webb is on his feet by 8:20, or we file before 9. Your call, Captain. Captain Hollis looked at Carlin. The look lasted 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds I watched Officer Carlin understand, with complete clarity, that the mathematics he had run on the sidewalk this morning had produced a catastrophically wrong answer. "Release him," Hollis said. "Captain, release him. Now." The handcuff marks on my wrists were faint pink crescents, barely visible. Carmichael photographed them anyway, precise and systematic, the way I photograph a surgical site. Richard handed me my phone and my jacket. I looked at Carlin once. He was staring at the floor. "I hope Dorothy Hamill recovers fully," I said. My voice was level and unhurried. She would have had a much harder morning without someone who knew what to do. Think about that. He didn't look up. I was in the OR by 8:51. Howard Briggs was on the table, Amir at his side, Yolanda with her gloved hands clasped in front of her, waiting. The room smelled of antiseptic and recycled air, and the particular metallic cleanness that I had always found, against all logic, calming. The monitor beeped in steady rhythm. A heart doing its job. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Howard," I said, taking my position. "My wife is going to kill me for the overtime, Doc," he said, from beneath the oxygen mask, voice already slow and thick with pre-sedation. "Tell her to send the bill to the 3rd District." He laughed, and then the anesthesia took him somewhere quiet, and I put my hands to work. The surgery lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. The valve seated cleanly. Howard's heart, when it resumed beating without assistance, did so with a steadiness that felt almost like a rebuke to everything complicated and human about the morning. Bodies don't care about the mess we make above them. They just want to keep going. The lawsuit was filed 3 weeks later. Section 1983 Civil Rights Claim. 4th and 14th Amendment violations. Documented racial profiling. Unlawful detention. The delivery driver's footage had been viewed 9 million times. A journalist at the city paper had run a profile under the headline, "The Doctor They Cuffed While He Saved a Life." Captain Hollis issued a public statement expressing regret and announcing a review of the department's encounter protocols. It was the kind of statement designed to close a door that was already open. Officer Carlin was suspended pending investigation. 2 months later, he resigned. I was told, through Richard, that he had moved out of the city. I didn't go looking for more information than that. The man I had seen on that sidewalk, certain, arithmetic-brained, immune to what was directly in front of him, was not my problem to solve. He was his own. Dorothy Hamill had a stand placed the afternoon of her collapse. I checked on her the 3rd day. She was sitting up in bed with a crossword puzzle, and when I knocked on the open door, she looked up and immediately began to cry. Not the helpless kind, the relieved kind, the kind that comes after the body has decided it's going to stay. "I'm so sorry," she said. "What they did to you. Because of me." "Because of you," I said, sitting in the chair beside her bed. "I was on that block at that exact time. If I'd been anywhere else, you'd have been alone on that sidewalk." She took my hand with both of hers and held it the way very few people hold a surgeon's hand. Not as a tool, just as a hand. "I told my daughter about you," she said. "She wants to send you something. I told her you probably didn't need anything." "I don't," I said. "But tell her thank you." I drove home that evening the long way, past Meridian Avenue. The bakery was still open, its window warm and yellow against the October dark. I parked and went inside, and bought an entire tray of something with cinnamon that I couldn't name, and I drove to the hospital and left it at the nurse's station on Howard Briggs's floor, with a note that said nothing except, "For the team." In the lobby on my way out, I stopped at the glass doors and looked at my own reflection for a moment. Jacket, bag over one shoulder, the faint pink marks on my wrists, nearly gone now. Outside, the city was doing what cities do at this hour, moving, lit, indifferent, ongoing. I had spent years learning to work within a world that sometimes looked at me and saw something other than what was there. I had decided long ago that the answer to that was not anger. Anger is metabolically expensive and architecturally unsound, but precision. Precision in work. Precision in record. Precision in knowing exactly what you are worth and refusing to accept any other denomination. The handcuff sound had not left me. I suspected it wouldn't for some time, but it sat beside other sounds now. The clean click of a valve seating correctly, Dorothy Hamill's laugh, Howard's groggy voice asking about overtime. The body has a remarkable capacity to hold multiple truths at once and keep moving. I pushed through the glass doors into the cold air and kept moving.